As we were planning to talk to you, something occurred to me that I hadn't thought of before, and I wanted to ask you. First, let me ask you, how long approximately did you live in the forest?
Approximately 10 years, off and on.
Yeah. And what I was thinking to myself that I think fits maybe with what you just said, that I wanted to appreciate. Elizabeth and I try to practice what we call a capabilities framework. We have these two really big questions that we're always curious about, which is what people are really, really good at and what they have a lot of. And I was thinking that I thought you'd spent about 10 years in the forest. I've been in the forests in New South Wales and spent some time in some of the big national parks there. And it's an entirely different environment than here in the Seattle area. And I was curious to ask you if you would be willing to say anything about you. I guess I would say this. My observation was you must have learned an extraordinary amount about that forest and that environment that most people would never know about in their lifetime. Is that fair to say?
That's very fair to say.
Yeah.
Yes. It's not just what I learn about the forest either. It's what I learn about myself in the forest.
In the forest, yeah.
Because there's a whole different set of skills that's needed to actually exist in a forest.
Yeah.
And there's a whole chapter of understandings that need to be learned very quickly when one lives in a forest. And especially forests over here, we know that there's not a lot of food in a forest, contrary to what we see in some movies. There's just not a lot of food. So diversity, mobility, it becomes quite important within a forest. And that's one of the reasons I became a vegetarian, is because, as I harvested the critters around me, they weren't being replaced. And so over time I realised I was actually losing all the little critters that I used to watch and make friends with. So basically I was eating my friends. So I made a very conscious decision that I didn't want to eat them anymore, and so I became a vegetarian. And then that sets up a whole different set of challenges there as well. But trade became very important in the forest here as well. So in the beginning I'd trade reptile skins, snake skins, little trinkets that I'd sit there and whittle and make in the forest. And people were very kind to me. I'd go to the markets around, the community markets, and do a bit of trading. I was a very sick human being. I think a lot of people took pity on me. But that helped me survive as well. One of the greatest skills I think I learned in the forest was how to light a fire when it's pouring rain. And you've got no, that's a skill. Especially when you're freezing cold, it's pouring rain and you just need a fire. So I can do that. I learned to track. I can read. Well, my eyes are not so good these days, but I learned to read sign in the forest, very good sign. I could smell. Your senses intensify incredibly when you're not associated with society smells, and I could smell people, half a kilometre away, just coming towards me. Smell their cologne or their perfume or their cigarette smoke, or sometimes it's just their sweat. You can smell it.
I wanted to ask. because the thought was in the way that, again, we've only known you through the film, and they communicate the incredible fact that you had lived for so long in the forest, but the narrative doesn't connect to something I want to ask you about, which is how did living in the forest contribute to your becoming Gregory Smith? Because I think it sounds very clearly, as you've shared with us, that was not a time in your life that just doesn't count for much. It sounds like it was while it might have had difficulties, that it was profoundly important. Is that fair to say?
Well, absolutely, that's fair to say. Look, it was a pivotal point in the transition from one part of my life into another.
Yeah.
And I say that it's about time. One of the things that society does so well is it commodifies time. Time is important. Time is money. Time is of the essence. What happened for me is that I took myself out of time as we understand it in society, and I parked myself in a forest, and I allowed myself to get sick enough to need to get well. Because I think sometimes we intervene in mental illness before it's time to actually do something about it. So I needed to transition through all my pain into a very uncomfortable position. Because people have said to me that I'm quite a stubborn person. And I argue with and say, well, no, I'm not stubborn, I'm tenacious, and there is a big difference between the two. Yeah. But they argue that I'm stubborn. So anyway, and I don't give up easily. So I needed to experience a lot of pain, a lot of emotional pain, before I could sit down and examine my life the way I needed to examine my life to make the changes that I needed to make. Sometimes it takes that much pain, emotional pain, physical pain, for a person to make the decisions that I needed to make. So I would like to take credit and say, well, one day I just decided to change, but that's not true. I only changed through agony, through mind anguish, depression, despair, loneliness. These are the things that were the driving forces for me to change who I was. Not because I woke up one morning and just wanted to be a better person. That's not true.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about so Kevin and I do some discussion of what healing looks like for different people. We work mostly with children in foster care scenarios, and our work, in my mind, is really realigning who holds the solution and the power there, which is families and young people, not systems, not therapists, not hospitals. As you're talking about holding space for the pain or the trauma or the depression or all of those things, and I think in pictures, so I'm thinking about you in this very outdoor, pouring rain or sunshine some days, I hope. And I'm struck because in some of the research I'm doing right now about what heals people, one of the things that comes up over and over and over again is time to sit with the things that happen to you or the pain you have in the forest, with the trees, with the animals, with the quiet of, being sort of alone but outside in a world that's progressively doesn't have access to that. There's a lot of argument for why that happens and how consistent the rhythm of that outdoor experience or being in a forest or feeling the sun on your face is with your own heart rate, breathing patterns, blood pumping through your body. I can't help but draw the parallel as you're talking about, you know, I didn't just wake up one day. I made space for it. I sat with it.
Yeah, and that's very important, I think. And I don't, there's no requirement for me to go back and dig up the past and rehash all those traumas, yeah. But what it does, that time, that openness, that it opens up new experiences. To feel the sun on my skin. Now, one of my favourite times in the forest was when it was full of mist and there was mystical mushrooms, and you know, some of them I ate, some of them I didn't. But it was just that feeling of magic. And I'd think I'd think way back about how people would construct these narratives around, you know, the forest creatures, myths, you know, and the boundaries. You can't go into that part of the forest because there's all these, you know, it's sacred, or there's monsters and all these things. And I would work through all these fantasies in my mind. And they were actually really good. They were really healthy, because what they were doing is they were constructing an alternative reality for me, while, you know, subconsciously I'm dealing with all this other stuff. So it gave me an outlet and a new understanding, an exploration, an adventure even, that I could have while I'm dealing with all these other things.
Yeah.
But then, you know, inevitably those adventures lead to back into my personal story. So if I'm thinking about mythology, you know, and sacred parts of the forest and things like this, then I'm starting to think, what about my ancestors? Who were they? What was my dad like? What was my mum like? Why were they like that? You know, how come they couldn't keep it together? How come they had so much conflict? Then I start to think about me. And I think, I've caused a lot of trouble in my life. But not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know any different, because nobody understood me. And so if I think, well, if I was like that, why wasn't my mum or my dad like that? Maybe they did the best they could. Maybe they were just so much like me, or I'm so much like them. You know, maybe they had trauma when they were kids. You know, so I start to join all those little dots together. And then I start to think, maybe they weren't so bad after all. Yeah, and you know, maybe I'll shed a tear for them. Maybe I'll get angry because they're not here now, and I can't talk to them and I can't ask them these questions. Yeah, but then I think they are here because they're still with me now. They're with me every day of my life. You know, I walk out in the sunshine, they feel that sunshine with me.
Yeah.
You know, I walk out to get some water out of my tap. You know, I'm thinking about all the people that don't have water, and they're with me when I'm thinking that. So it constructs a whole new understanding of not just who I am, but of my spirituality, of my role, my purpose in life. And, you know, my purpose in life is to be that, you know, be that moment between two other moments. It's the moment of my parents and the moment of my children. And so I'm that link. You know, and sometimes we don't get that opportunity and sometimes we do.
It's one of the things about the film we saw that, you know, in it is is your sister's story and your nephew's story that comes across, and your sister healing her life, and how your own healing, influenced the healing of other people. And that was a very profound, for me, it was a very profound part of the story, was listening to your sister talk about that, and you talk about that. I thought that was really extraordinary. And if I could add, because I don't want us to lose the opportunity, and you can speak about this or not, but the thing I learned that I hadn't known about, and I've done some learning about since, was the Forgotten Australians report.
Yeah.
And the recognition you had that not only were you a part of the Forgotten Australians, but that your sisters were also. Can you talk about the Forgotten Australians and about the sort of, because I see both as, when I said, well, who's Gregory P Smith? I mean, or Gregory Smith. One of the things I would say was that you were a healer and a teacher and a friend. But I was curious to hear what you would say.
I'm just another human being having a lived experience.
Yeah.
Doing the best I can, like the rest of us.
Yeah.
I'm a very fortunate person. I've been gifted an opportunity to understand who I am, to change who I am. Not everybody has that opportunity.
Yeah.
To change who they are. I guess I've had many lives. I've been an abused child. I've had the experience of living in institutions, in jails. I've been a seasonal worker. I've been a hermit, a transient, a vagrant, an alcoholic, a drug addict. I mean, I've been addicted to heroin, cocaine, alcohol, marijuana. I've shared conversations with aliens, deep psychosis. I've lived in a forest. I've been a hermit. I've got a PhD.
Yeah.
When I stop and I start to think about my life, like in that, and sometimes I need, it can become quite overwhelming, to be honest. When I think about my lived experience. But next month I've been asked to do a TEDx talk. As well, so I've been thinking about that and trying to put that into I think about an 18-minute, because this so it's the opportunities that I've had. I talk to a lot of assemblies of carers, social workers, caseworkers, different groups. Not everybody gets those opportunities. Even my academic colleagues don't really get those opportunities either.
Yeah.
So I'm a very fortunate human being.
I think you really just added to the question I'd asked earlier. It was the thing. I mean this in the best sense, but I'm going to use the word anyway. The thing that haunts me and stays with me about your story, and is a profound gift, quite frankly, I'd like to thank you for, fits really well with what you just said, which was, I recognized that the way I've been maybe I'll say acculturated, taught to see the world is so flat and so narrowly focused on what is valued and what is not, what a life is, what is a good life, what is a bad life. And you remind me of, and it has an Australian connection, which is a place called the Dulwich Centre in South Australia, the home of narrative therapy, where they use this language of welcoming multiple stories, of telling full, thick stories, of looking not at what people do, but what they believe, and how and they speak words like evidence of a life lived. And I think when I saw your piece, I saw in real life some of those different ideas I had encountered along the way. And I could look at them against situations I've had in my professional career where I was trying my best to use the tools that the dominant culture had given me, and I was failing at my life's work. And in the face of that failure, I saw the person in front of me suffering. And I don't know if I'm making sense to you, but it brought your life, and the way you tell the story of your life brought these different threads together for me, at least, in what I thought was a profound way.
Yeah, I don't think any life is fail, or any part of a life is failure. It's just a new way of learning. I mean, that's wisdom that's been passed down through the generations. And that's another part of it. Old wisdom is good wisdom. Old knowledge is good with knowledge.
One time that I showed your film in the last year, here in the United States, which you may know was not only a difficult year as the rest of the world has experienced around COVID-19, but because of the murder of George Floyd by police officers in Minnesota, and the reaction of the world to watching violence directed and murder toward a Black man. Someone in one of our groups asked the question, what would Gregory Smith's story be if instead of a white man, he were an indigenous First Nations person in Australia? How would you answer that question? What would we be having this conversation? What would have happened?
No, we wouldn't. No, we wouldn't.
Yeah.
No, we wouldn't. Well, there's no way we would have this conversation. The opportunities that I've been presented with just would not happen for a First Nations person. A First Nations person would never have experienced the orphanage it's the same way I did. When I was in the orphanage, there was an Aboriginal man there, or a boy there, Gussie Nichols, his name was. I've never been able to find Gussie. He was there. He was my best mate in the orphanage, and he just disappeared. He just disappeared. I know I have tried to find him. No, look, I'm a person first. A human first. We all are. We are, regardless of, race, religion. We're people, and we're so rich. Our cultures, our heritage is so rich. It upsets me. It upsets me to think that we can't respect each other. We can't respect culture. We can't respect race. We can't respect ideas. gee whiz, I've had some pretty crazy ideas in my life. Yeah, but I haven't been shot for them.
Right.
I've done some pretty stupid things in my life, but I haven't been shot for them.
Yeah.
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 We don't know the opportunity we're obviously because of the people that we extinguish. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, people say that, you know, I make a contribution. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. That's not for me to judge. But if I do make a contribution, and if I had been extinguished, you know, in my 20s, I wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
We wouldn't be having this conversation.
Yeah.
It's very sad. And I mean, I'm also an advocate. I'm really, really single mums, young women, single mums, you know, they make such a massive contribution to our communities, to our understanding, and yet, you know, they're so disrespected.
Yeah.
And you know, older women as well, you know, women that were asked, you know, during the 50s and 60s to make contributions to populating our countries, you know, so they give up their work, they give up their careers, they have children, they have the babies, they become wives, you know, they do all the volunteer work in the schools, the tuck shops and everywhere else, you know, and then they later in life, you know, their relationships break down, their marriages break down, so they're cast aside, they don't have any superannuation, they don't have any assets, and then we treat them, you know, we treat them miserably and judge them on, you know, it's just crazy stuff.
Yeah.
Just absolutely crazy stuff.
Yeah. But you know,
you got me going. That was
yeah, no, that was powerful. I hope this is not our last conversation. I hope this is the beginning of more conversations, and hopefully, as you've shown in your life, and as we always talk about moving to action. And I just want to say, maybe the single most important reason to me that we connect and had the opportunity to learn not only from your story but your humility is we've got to thicken the stories of humans. You know, I apologize. It sounds a little odd, but there's a man by the name of Father Gregory Boyle, who was a very famous healer of gang members here in the United States, and he comes to my mind. What he's done to create a community of healing for some of the most, you know, injured human beings on our planet is counter to the story. He doesn't approach people about talking about their violence. He approaches people with the view that they are perfect exactly as they are, and that extraordinariness is where we find each other. And I've heard that in our entire conversation today. And I think those stories are what we need for our own healing and for our own ability to make contributions to the healing of others, is not to look at brokenness, but to look at what is absolutely extraordinary. You're an example of extraordinariness of a human being.
I show the video of you every training as a starting place for people to think about. You mentioned women, so I'll acknowledge it. I've spent most of my career trying to change the narrative we tell about parents, from these villains who abuse children or neglect children or do all of these things, to you spoke about your own parents. What happened to them? How did they come to be the way that they are? It doesn't make it okay to treat a child that way, but it also doesn't make it okay to make them just a villain. without all these other pieces.
That's
So
right.
I'm just absorbing that and thinking about, you know, how much
Understanding
there is to do.
helps me understand. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So understanding them helps me to understand me.
Yeah. I think that's true for many people I know.
Yep. Yeah, well, yep. Sunshine and rainbows go with sun and beaches. So
Mhm. Yeah.
we need it all.
Yeah. You can't have
We,
rainbows
we
without
can't
the
speak a sentence. We can't speak a sentence with a whole what's missing. They just don't make sense. And that's a bit like life.
many conversations to come. You know, it's one thing to watch someone's story and have just a little piece. This is always more preferable in my mind to actually have the honor of knowing you and talking to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Smith.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Have a great morning. It's morning there, right? So have a great rest of your day. Enjoy it.
Yep. Okay.
Enjoy it.
Okay then. You take care.
Thank you.
Okay.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye.